I'm joined now by Dan Rockmore, the chair of the Department of Mathematics and a professor of computer science at Dartmouth College. Dr. Rockmore has published essays and editorials on math for publications such as the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and the Dallas Morning News. He has also appeared as a commentator for NPR and Vermont Public Radio on subjects ranging from art forgery to the number 11. Dr. Rockmore, welcome to LA Theater Works, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Great to be here.
I'd like to start by talking about the central mathematical concept in completeness, which is the traveling salesman problem, or TSP. Describe for us, if you can, the TSP in a nutshell.
Sure. It follows right from its name. So you've got this poor traveling salesman who's got to travel around to a bunch of cities, and before he plans his route, he takes a look at the map and sees all these intercity distances and says to himself, look, I don't want to spend a lot of money on this trip. Or maybe, in fact, he says to himself, I want to see the best scenery on this trip. I don't care how long it takes. And then he goes about planning a trip that, as we would say, optimizes his fuel usage, or if you like, his scenery, and tries to find the best route with respect to that wish of his. So if it is just distance, which is what it is usually, then you're looking for the shortest route or circuit that hits every city. And there are, of course, many possible circuits, but you want to find the shortest one.
Why is it called problem? Traveling salesman problem?
Well, that's a really good question, because when you say it's a problem, it's something that has to be solved. So it's a problem. So you pose it as that. You say, what is the minimum length circuit, as I've described it? You start, let's say, in Hanover, New Hampshire, and then you have to hit all these cities, and then you come back to Hanover, New Hampshire. So the problem is to find that minimum. But there's a general problem, if you like, which is, if a salesman or a collection of salesmen gave you an arbitrary collection of cities with whatever distances they are, could you then solve that problem efficiently? Could you find that minimum quickly? Because if you have even 11 cities and all the interpoint distances, in fact, the number of possible ways in which you could go between those cities is already in the millions, in fact. So that's the problem, if you like. If you're really looking for the best route, and you just did it, what one would say, naively, saying, all right, well, first let me try this, then let me try that, and you're up to, let's say, 20 cities or 30 cities, you'd never finish. There are more possibilities, than there are breaths that you take in your lifetime.
So I take it that with the advent of computers, the traveling salesman problem has been quite mitigated.
It has and it hasn't. For example, if you were up to 40 or 50 cities, which were just sort of randomly picked around the planet, a computer proceeding totally naively, not doing anything smart, in other words, not having a computer scientist behind it saying, you might not want to try that one, it wouldn't finish in anyone's lifetime. Even the fastest computers would be totally stymied by this if they just did this naive, let me try this route, let me try that route kind of approach. So computing gets you so far, but then you really need some way to think about it to get you to the end.
So how accurate was Eliot's description of the problem in the play?
Eliot's was good. To be honest, you have to account a little bit for the medium. He's in a play. He's not giving a lecture to a room of computer scientists. If I was at a cocktail party or having coffee with friends, I wouldn't give them a lecture either. So in the broadest of terms, it's great. And I'd have to say exactly the way that I would explain it to somebody that I had just met who was interested in what I was working on. So I was quite happy with it.
So I take it in real life, no one has yet come close to solving the traveling salesman problem.
The question is, what's a solution? Right?
Uh-huh.
So
what's a good enough solution?
That's exactly right. So there are many ways that you could say that the traveling salesman's problem was solved. You could say that I'm willing to admit a reasonable approximation, if you like, to the best possible path. You could also say that I just want to do it this much faster than doing it naively. So in that sense, there have been solutions, or if you like, progress. And then when I say progress, because what people view as the sort of holy grail for working on the traveling salesman problem is to find a very efficient algorithm or process which, regardless of the input, so regardless of the cities and the point-to-point distances, would complete in a very fast time, which in computer science land is usually called a polynomial time algorithm in the input. So meaning that if there were 20 cities, for example, then I could have an algorithm which would finish in something on the order of 20 to some power, some specific power, like let's say 11. It would take 20 to the 11th, at most 20 to the 11th operations to find me that minimal path.
So this is what Elliot was really attempting to do. He was attempting to find the algorithm that would actually go a long way towards solving the traveling salesman problem.
Yes. What Elliot thinks he's come upon is actually one of these quote-unquote polynomial time solutions. And, as you hear him, he's simultaneously delirious and terrified because it's one of the outstanding open questions in mathematics and computer science. The Clay Institute, which is a mathematics research institute that funds all sorts of things, including prizes, has put up $1 million prize if you could find a polynomial time algorithm for the traveling salesman problem. So there's a question. Is it possible to find such an algorithm? And if a person does produce an algorithm or, in fact, show that it's impossible to find an algorithm, and you can imagine the impossibility one is more complicated because everybody on the planet would have some idea of how to find the shortest path. So to say that you could never do better than something is even more complicated. But that aside, if you did find one or found that it was impossible, that's worth $1 million because it's connected to so many other deep questions in mathematics, computer science, and also engineering, as it turns out. A solution to that problem would change many things about the way in which we communicate digitally.
What are some of the most interesting practical applications of the TSP?
There are a couple ways to think about the applications. First of all, the fact that it's a sort of easy-to-state problem, and lots of people have worked on it. And every time somebody makes even a little progress, finding a better algorithm, finding some new method to approach it, it has implications for all sorts of problems in scheduling. How does FedEx send the trucks around? How does UPS send the trucks around? But beyond what are natural analogies to the notion of a salesman traveling around, there are also applications to gene sequencing, circuit board organization, astronomical mapping. But it's had its greatest implications in just giving people new ways to think about what we call optimization problems. And optimization problems occur everywhere. The dramatic implications for a good solution are in a sort of indirect way. The traveling salesman problem is a particular kind of problem. It's called an NP-complete problem.
Hence the name Completeness.
Well, you see, this is why I think, the play is sort of beautifully subtle in texture in an interesting way. So let me tell you what this NP-complete thing is without getting into the details, and then we can see it in the play, which is often the best way to see science is sort of illuminated by art. So the thing about the traveling salesman problem is that it's a particular kind of problem such that if I found this polynomial time algorithm, this highly efficient algorithm, in which case this statement P equals NP is true, what would then be true is there'd be a whole class of very difficult problems or problems, computational problems that seem very difficult, which all of a sudden would find new and totally wacky solutions because there would be an algorithm which would allow the seemingly very complicated problem to be quickly transformed into an instance of the traveling salesman problem, then be solved as the traveling salesman problem, and then be put back as a solution to this seemingly impossible problem. So that's the sort of completeness part. Like solving this problem or any NP-complete problem has implications for a huge range of important problems. And in particular, solving the traveling salesman problem in this way would in fact mean that all of our current e-commerce schemes would have an approach which could be possible in the terms of breaking them. Like most of our cryptography schemes would then, to be vulnerable to attack might be too strong because if this polynomial, if it takes you, 20 to the bazillion as a power, you probably still can't compute it. But that said, it would begin to give people a feeling like, oh my God, that's actually approachable. And it could conceivably change, basically the way we do business as we do business now on the internet.
So let's circle back to the play. You were saying that the word completeness as a title and the whole concept was a beautiful construct with regard to helping us understand through art some of the very intriguing aspects of a particular part of
Yeah,
science.
sure. So one of the main themes in the play is relationships, people searching for love at a complicated time in their life, graduate school. And, ultimately you get this sense from the conversations that they understand something that I think many people would agree with, which is that if you can solve that problem, the problem of finding a person to love who loves you back, and respects you and likes you the way you are, however nutty you may be, that's the NP complete problem of life, right? You've solved that one, and you've solved almost everything else. Everything else is in the noise. Whatever else you do, it gets transformed back to this one fact. Well, I know I've got that person with me. I'll be okay. That's how I saw it, and that's where I saw the title. So I like that.
The play Completeness is as much about the social constructs of graduate school as it is about the science. What challenges would you say are unique to graduate students in the sciences and why?
To answer that from my perspective, I think when you're in college and when you're in high school and you're working on science, you always know that you're going to get to the next step. You're going to pass your test. You're going to finish the lab. It might not have worked out the way it was supposed to work out, and a million people before you did this lab. But, something's going to happen and you're going to move on. Grad school in the sciences for almost all students is often the first time that they come up against a problem where they're not quite sure how it's going to go. Is this going to work? I mean, does this question even make sense? When you see a homework problem, somebody's thought about the question, knows what the answer is, right? But when you ask a research question for the first time, first of all, you don't even know if it's a good question. You might get a result which is totally boring and meaningless. And that, I think, that can be quite terrifying.
What is the rate of attrition in a graduate level math or computer science program? And do people find it significantly harder to stick with a line of study in these fields?
The most current statistics that I know of, and they look at a reasonably large cohort, roughly around the late 90s to the early 2000s, the attrition rate in the sciences is about 30 to 40%, and that's over a 10-year period. So people start at some time, and then you look every year, how many people left before getting their PhD. So that's 30 to 40% over 10 years. And in math, over that same period, it's about 40%. So it's on the high end. And in computer science, in fact, it's even higher. It's at 50%. So that's, not so encouraging. But on the other hand, if you look over shorter periods, for example, how many people left in up to 4 years, in fact, what we've seen recently is a steady decline, that more and more people are staying longer. So that at least shows that potentially things are moving in the right direction. And I do think, in fact, that the math and computer science numbers are probably skewed a bit by the fact that people do get opportunities as they acquire more and more expertise. So somebody who has a couple of years of significant mathematics or significant computer science under his or her belt is suddenly attractive to Google, is suddenly attractive to a hedge fund. And, for many people, that's a difficult decision. Do I stay in grad school with an unsure future in terms of a tenure-track job, or somebody's dangling a pretty big prize in front of me? Maybe I should just do that. And people don't even think about it necessarily as, going for the money, because many of those environments are quite vibrant intellectually. I mean, we shouldn't kid ourselves. It's not it's not that they're going out and being chained to a desk for 3 times the salary. Those environments can be quite interesting and vibrant. So anyway, I think in math and computer science, at least, that those numbers get skewed for that reason.
One of the academic issues raised in Completeness is the matter of interdepartmental collaboration. How common is the sort of collaboration proposed by Elliot and Molly in the play?
Well, Elliot and Molly's collaboration is, as one of my biology buddies here at Dartmouth says, is it's just the way we do business now. So much of, not all of biology is like this, but certainly the kind of biology that Molly is studying with certain kinds of arrays, which are looking at expression levels and things like that. getting discoveries in those situations is a lot of significant statistical analysis and data mining, as people might call it, or as I would call it, machine learning or statistical learning. So that's between mathematics and biology and mathematics and genetics or mathematics and proteomics, which is where Molly is working. It truly is just the way people do business now. One of the big places that does genetics kinds of research, the Broad Institute in Cambridge, a Harvard-MIT consortium, the people there, I don't even know if there's a trained bench geneticist in the building. I know there are so many mathematicians in there, and they've found all sorts of great things in the genome, and that's one of the top places in the country. So those kinds of collaborations are really the way that science has gone. Generally speaking, interdepartmental collaboration is quite high. I think many places now acknowledge that the hard problems that we're confronted with, whether it's understanding the brain or climate warming, economy, all of these things require multiple expertises to be brought to bear on finding anything that even comes close to a solution. The idea that you could just be a psychologist working in a vacuum and you'd figure out the brain without also talking to biologists and anthropologists and geneticists and statisticians is a dream from bygone days. The big problems are all being approached by collaborations.
How do women fare nowadays in math or computer science careers or on a professional level?
Well, roughly 40% of the PhDs that are received in science and engineering go to women. So women, of course, make up roughly 50% of the population. So we're not exactly at parity yet in terms of finishing graduate school anyway. Unfortunately, it is worse in the mathematical and physical sciences, where the number is probably around 20%. So there's still a gap there, and everyone acknowledges it, and a lot's being done to try to change that.
What steps do you think should be taken or are being taken to further bolster the presence of women in science?
A lot of studies do show, and this is independent of practically any career choice you make, but the notion of having a mentor and having a community around you so that you don't feel like the only person doing the thing that you're doing is a pretty important factor in whether or not people continue to do the kind of work that they want to do. So in particular in math and science, putting into place a lot of the support systems to show that, hey, women do math. Our department here had a day for school-age kids, which was all about women and girls doing mathematics, and there were 70 girls in the room totally jazzed about doing math, and they were given lectures by well-known women mathematicians, and they did activities run by our absolutely fantastic women graduate students in mathematics, and they listened to panels by our great women undergraduate math majors. And, those kinds of experiences for a kid to see those people and say, hey, I am one of them, I will be one of them, is pretty powerful. And that's true at all the different transition points.
Overall, how would you rate playwright Itamar Moses' grasp of the science behind completeness? Does he get it mostly right?
Well, I can't say so much about the biology, although I do know a little bit about the networks he was talking about. But I thought the computer science conversations were pretty much spot on. I think I could vaguely remember myself having analogous ones when I was in graduate school, trying to chat up some nice woman. I liked it.
Dan Rockmore, thanks for speaking with us today.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
I've been speaking with Dan Rockmore, a professor of computer science and mathematics at Dartmouth College.